Welcome to Crime Stoppers, presented by Main Street Bank. Production of WTRF7, Love OV, and Crime Stoppers Upper Ohio Valley. I'm Nick Nash, your host, and joining us today is our producer, Katie Richardson, who, alongside myself, has been involved in Crime Stoppers since the very beginning. All of the interviews, all of the tapings, everything that we've done, Katie has been behind the scenes, and now she joins us on camera for a special episode of Crime Stoppers. Hi, Katie.
Hi, you dragged me on camera. Let's just be real about that.
Normally
off camera. I really enjoy working with Nick, but like you said, I'm there for everything. I've been on every interview. I like to ask questions too. We just make you rephrase them. So this is going to be interesting, going back over some of the cases we've covered so far.
So we wanted to do something a little bit different for this week's episode. While we're working with Crime Stoppers Upper Ohio Valley and local law enforcement on our next case, we wanted to take a break and recap some of the episodes that we've done over the last couple of months. We've talked about Kyle Morgan and his murder in Wheeling. We've talked about the disappearance of Brian Goff and Joni Davis in Belmont County. And so today we wanted to kind of give a recap, any new information that we have on these cases, as well as answering some questions from Facebook and viewers that way as well.
Right. These two cases have been intense too because they are both fairly recent. So people in the Ohio Valley remember these. You know, we're not talking about cold cases from the 80s. We're talking about cases that they need new leads on, but they're asking for these leads because people might still know something. They're fairly recent. So yeah, let's go back over it and rehash what happened. And they've had tips come in from our show, so maybe we can get even more after this.
Yeah, we've had a lot of tips come in for both the Kyle Morgan case and the Brian Goff and Joni Davis case. Let's go back to Kyle Morgan. We started covering this in June of this year. This was the first case that we dug into alongside the Wheeling Police Department. And just a quick recap of the case. If you're not familiar with it, you can watch all of the episodes on the Love OV Facebook page, as well as the Crime Stoppers Upper Ohio Valley website. But Kyle Morgan was a high school student from Moundsville who came to Wheeling supposedly to jump on a Greyhound bus to visit his mother in Kentucky. He ends up dead underneath the Fort Henry Bridge in Wheeling the next day. Not a whole lot of movement over the last 3, 4, 5 years on this, and we're trying to find some new information on anybody that might know what happened that night.
In our prep for this case, I kept saying to you, there is a huge hole. What they need help with in this case is there is this huge hole. They know Kyle came to Wheeling. They know who he rode in the car with. There are some very specific things they know about how Kyle came to even be in Wheeling because he is from Moundsville. But then after this friend and this grandmother drop him off at the Greyhound bus station, there's nothing until his body is found the next morning.
Like Katie said, the biggest thing that we talked about over and over and over behind the scenes while discussing this case was what happened between the time he was dropped off in Wheeling and the time his body was found. There's a huge gap in information in what exactly happened that night. We have no idea. We don't have a real time of when he was killed. We don't know if it was that night, if it was early the next morning, sometime overnight. We don't know who was there, how he ended up under the bridge, which we still kind of think we have a hard time putting him there. We have a hard time finding out how he would legitimately end up in that area.
Yeah, because you and I did a little driving tour of figuring out, after doing multiple interviews for this case, you and I said, let's go see exactly the distance between where he was dropped off and the bridge, and it's why did he go there?
The biggest question was, did he find himself in bad weather and ended up under the bridge to get out of the weather? I think that was probably the most plausible of those scenarios, but still, we found a lot of other places between where he started and where he ended up that would have been just fine to get out of the weather. Why did he pass up all of those areas and end up under the bridge? That was really the biggest question, and it's still a question we don't really have an answer for.
Right, or if whatever happened to him happened somewhere else, how did his body get under the bridge? That could be another, and this was in downtown Wheeling. I mean, yes, it was after dark, it was raining, but people are in downtown Wheeling at all hours. somebody saw something. We believe somebody saw something.
We believe somebody saw something. We're still a little perplexed about the lack of any security camera footage from that area. But again, this was 3-4 years ago when maybe cameras weren't as ubiquitous as they are now. We just don't know. We just don't have an answer for that, and unfortunately law enforcement doesn't either.
And what is the latest with this case? Has there been any movement since we did the episodes that we did covering Kyle's case?
I know there have been a number of tips come in for this one. I don't know specifically what those tips are. As far as real movement in moving the case forward, unfortunately, I don't have any updates as far as any new persons of interest or any new leads or any new clues that could potentially close it. But I do believe that this is a case that people are continuing to talk about. There was a lot of discussion about the friend and the grandmother and the homeless population. I don't know that there is a sole theory that they're sticking to right now. Unfortunately, we're still looking for more information.
And that is a question one of our viewers has. A guy named David has asked, why aren't police focusing more on Kyle's friend and his grandmother?
So this is a question I've gotten a lot since we started the show. Why is there not more focus on these two individuals? The woman was arrested, was brought in for questioning. She was charged with, and law enforcement can give you the official name of the charge, but it was basically holding back information from law enforcement. The cell phone was found on her property. The boy, the friend, from what I understand, found it in the car, panicked, and threw it over the hill. I asked a number of pointed questions to Sergeant Seyfried and the Wheeling Police Department about these particular people and their involvement, and the police do not believe that they were involved in the murder of Kyle Morgan. They were very adamant about believing that these two simply drove them to Wheeling, or drove Kyle to Wheeling. Kyle left his phone accidentally in the car. The boy found it the next day, realized Kyle was missing, panicked, and threw it over the hill, which, terrible thing to do. I wish he had not done that, but it's a plausible scenario for me. Now, if you're asking my opinion on whether or not they were involved or they have some more information, I think I would want to find out more information on that, but law enforcement is telling me that they have ruled them out as suspects and are looking at other avenues.
And again, with this case being several years old and our extensive interviews with law enforcement, they've done so much. And it wasn't just one time. They didn't just pull the friend in one time. They didn't just pull the grandmother in one time. Anyone else that had information, they've gone over and over and over this case with people that were somehow involved.
Right, and that is one of the downsides to having a show like this, where we're covering things in 5-minute segments, 10-minute segments, is we can't dive into 4 years of research from police. We give you as much information as we possibly can that we find to be relevant, but there's still a lot happening behind the scenes that even we don't know about.
Right.
Obviously, anytime you're discussing open, active investigations, there are things that police just don't release. And again, that comes back to the core idea of the show is we're not here to solve the crimes.
No.
We're here to get as much information as we can and hopefully find some people that are watching that might know something and call the tip line.
We did have another viewer, Melissa. She's asking, is there a main suspect that police are considering for Kyle's murder?
I believe, and this is based on my conversations with Sergeant Seyfried, that there was at one time a member of the homeless population in Wheeling that was considered to be the best suspect that they had up to that point. There were many conversations had with this individual. I don't believe this individual ever admitted to anything, but maybe had
More information than
more
anyone
information
else.
than anybody else had. Unfortunately, that individual is deceased, having committed suicide not long after discussions with police. So you can read into that however you like. That person was considered at the very least a person of interest. Now, whether or not that means they were suspected of having committed the crime or if they simply knew something or had been there, I can't answer that. I don't know.
So once again, with this case, what do we need? You know, police have this information up to when Kyle gets to Wheeling, but there could be more if you know something about leading up to that. But what's the big hole in this case? What do we need viewers to really, you know, rack their brains about?
I think the biggest thing that I think could close this case, or at least get closer to closing this case, is anybody that saw anything that night, the night that Kyle went missing, whether you were in downtown Wheeling late, or if you know somebody, or if there was, because we're dealing with the homeless population, right? At that time, the Fort Henry Bridge was kind of a hot spot for drug activity, for sleeping under the bridge, that sort of thing. Anybody that may have been around that area at that time, I think it's going to take somebody that either was there or has firsthand knowledge of somebody that was there to bring some new information. Unfortunately, that's a really small sample size of people in Wheeling, and I just think that's what it's going to take to blow this thing wide open.
But with this case, with the next case we're going to talk about, with any case we talk about for the rest of this video series, if you know anything, if someone has mentioned something to you, you didn't have to be standing right there when it happened. Call the tip line.
And that's the thing that we keep mentioning about the tip line. If you have any information, even if you weren't there, don't have firsthand knowledge, or you're not even sure if it's true, let the police sort that out. Call the tip line at 1-877-TIPS-4US and let them take that information and do what they can with it.
If you have more questions, let us know. But let's move on to the second case we covered. This one, totally different, because it's another thing where we know some information, there's also this big hole, but this is a disappearance. And this, I think we found out really quickly in our interviews and talking to each other and researching the case. It's just entirely different. It's a different outlook. We approached it differently. We approached speaking with law enforcement differently. It was just totally different than the Kyle Morgan case.
It was very different, and I think the biggest difference, if you had to point to one thing that was very, very different about this case, is that there's almost zero evidence for anything. It's a disappearance where two people and a vehicle went missing, and there's absolutely no trace of them. And that's difficult when you don't have anything to go on.
From day one, you and I said to each other, it's hard to hide a car. If something bad happened to them intentionally, because that's another thing with this case, there's so many things on the table. Kyle Morgan was murdered.
Right.
Brian and Joni Goff are still missing.
Right.
So there's just a different set of scenarios that could have happened. But no matter what, it's hard to not find a car. Let me phrase it that way. I don't want to say it's hard to hide a car. It's hard to not locate a car.
And there's a difference between two different scenarios. It's hard to lose a car when the car goes missing unintentionally. If somebody drives a car off and their car goes missing, it's very, very difficult to just lose a car that way. Now, it's a little bit easier to make a car disappear if you're trying to make it disappear, right? So if you have a car that you want to get rid of because it would be evidence in a crime, it would be a little bit easier because it would have to be intentionally disposed of, which leads me to believe that it was intentionally disposed of. There was a discussion with Special Agent Lacey of the FBI. I met with him at the Belmont County Sheriff's Office, and we discussed how easy is it to get rid of a car. My only knowledge of getting rid of a car is what you see in TV and in movies, and he mentioned that there are somewhere scrap yards that will take your vehicle and smash it and get rid of it for a low fee and no questions asked, right? So if that's a real thing and that's a method of disposing of a car, maybe that's a possibility here. I just don't know.
Quick rehash of that case too. Brian Goff and Joni Davis are two people that have a routine, so that helps in terms of investigation.
Very much so.
But they leave their Sunday night Pizza Hut in St. Clairsville dinner, and instead of going to these other errands they used to run, you know, the family and other people told us he'd go here and get a soda from this station.
Stop at the Marathon gas station on the island and pick up a pack of cigarettes and a Reese's cup. And then they would stop at, I believe it was Arby's, and pick up a sweet tea for Joni. And they did that every week. That was their routine. They skipped that latter half of the routine after dinner. and headed north on 7. Their vehicle last pinged near Rush Run Road.
And after, on a normal Sunday, they go and do their little routines, and then they go home. So even if they decided not to go do the routines for some reason, they did not go home after
They
Pizza
never made it
Hut.
home then.
Yes, and they have this cell phone ping out on Rush Run Road. So again, what's the big hole in this case? That what do we need help from the public with?
Yeah, the big hole in this case is finding some level of evidence of what happened to them, some trace of Brian and Joni, where they ended up. It's very difficult to simply disappear. When you have family that is keeping track of you for the most part, and you're checking in with people regularly, it's hard to just up and vanish. So I think the biggest question here is, obviously, where are they? Where is the vehicle? Where are Brian and Joni? But what were their steps that night? They jumped off of their routine and went into a different scenario. What was the path? What happened to them after their phone last pinged near Rush Run Road? That's the biggest question, is finding that evidence, some sort of physical thing that shows where they ended up.
And if you go back and watch our videos, which you should, Brian's brother's girlfriend lived on Rush Run Road. They'd been there to visit them before. But so that's just a step in the police process, that property has been searched, that other places have been searched. Again, police have done their due diligence. We're not doing any sort of police work here. They have done almost everything they can.
Right.
And so in terms of there being no evidence, they have searched multiple properties, locations, and there is just nothing.
There's nothing, and that's odd, and we can get into this here in just a few minutes, but I think after the discussions with both law enforcement and with Joni's family, there were a lot of arrows being pointed to a certain direction, and that certain direction was Brian's brother and his girlfriend Karen that lived on Rush Run Road. We were very careful in our coverage to not say, it seems obvious this is pointing in a certain direction, because we want to keep things open. Obviously, there are a lot of perspectives, there are a lot of things that point in a certain way, but we want to make sure that the viewer knows that law enforcement is investigating every possible angle of this, and there are a lot of reasons why or why not that these people might be considered persons of interest.
And we did a lot of interviews for this case. We did a lot of research for the Kyle Morgan case too, but family wanted to speak to us about this one. They have an entirely different perspective than law enforcement does. And you and I were really into the interviews, and it was easy for us to get swayed too. And we kind of had to have meetings afterwards and talk it out and about how we were going to approach it once we got on camera with, our side of it. But whether something is pointing a direction or not, it seems crazy that there's no evidence for anything. There is no evidence for this being on purpose. There is no evidence for this being an accident. There is no evidence, period. So this is where we need the public's help.
This is kind of it. I mean, we more so than the Kyle Morgan case, we finished up this one, and I still felt like it was incomplete. I still felt like, obviously they're all incomplete because there's no resolution to it, but I felt almost empty at the end of this case because we didn't have any more answers than we had when we started.
That's very true. And that leads to a couple of questions that, our viewers have questions too. They want the answers too. So Kathy says, if law enforcement considers Brian's brother to be a person of interest and the former girlfriend, why hasn't he been questioned?
This is a question I get a lot, and I think we covered this a fair amount in the show, but the answer is he has. Colin and Karen both have been questioned. They've been brought in by police and have been cooperative, as far as I know, with law enforcement on this case. And that also goes for Bruce Goff, the third brother of Brian and Colin both. In fact, Bruce was on the show, came on with us and discussed the case as well. So the answer to that is yes, they have been questioned. They've been talked to, and as far as I know, they have all been cooperative in discussing the case with law enforcement.
And law enforcement continues to talk to them.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. And Sergeant Stewart mentioned, Lieutenant Stewart, he's
Yes.
actually had just
Promotion.
been promoted. Lieutenant Stewart had mentioned that they have plans to discuss this further with both Colin and Bruce in the future. What the timeline is on that, I don't know. That's up to law enforcement to figure out how they want to talk and what gets covered, those sorts of things. But I do believe, to answer the question, I do believe that they have been cooperative and they have been discussing the case with law enforcement.
This one also had an interesting aspect where the FBI is involved. You got the opportunity to actually interview an FBI agent. So John is asking, though, if the FBI has been involved since the beginning, why did they just recently put out an official missing poster?
That's a really, really good question. And it's one that I asked whenever the missing poster first came out. We were actually talking with the newsroom here at WTRF when the missing poster first came out, and they're saying this is the first official missing persons poster from the FBI on this case. And my initial thought was, why now? Why is this just now happening? I did discuss that with Special Agent Lacey, and that is in the third episode, I believe, of the show. And his answer, I had a hard time kind of figuring out what his reasoning was. And his reasoning basically was, well, Belmont County had put out posters early on and the FBI simply had not. And so I don't know if that really answered the question as to why they didn't put one out earlier. I don't know. And honestly, I don't know if it matters all that much. I know the FBI has been involved since 2019. And Special Agent Lacey has been on the case since about that time. And they've been very, very involved. There's a lot of things happening there. And maybe he was holding his cards close to the vest too. So, there are always things that they want to discuss and things that they're not sure they want to discuss.
Does an FBI missing poster mean they are considering this crosses state lines? Which, of course, this is the Ohio Valley. There's state lines everywhere. That's so easy. But is that?
That was another question I asked him, because I asked Special Agent Lacey what the involvement was of the FBI, why the FBI got involved, what constitutes them getting involved. And his answer was, typically when it involves a case where something or somebody is crossing state lines. So I asked him, is there belief that Brian and Joni may have been transported across state lines? And he said, not necessarily. However, help was requested by Belmont County Sheriff's Office, and that's why they got involved. I don't know if that was a straight answer. It almost led me to believe that they kind of suspected that there was some movement over state lines, but he told me that they have no reason to believe that. So,
and it could literally just be our location on a map. Ohio, West Virginia, Pennsylvania isn't far. It could be our location.
Being in the tri-state area, it would be very, very, very easy to transport somebody or something over state lines relatively easy.
So let's just remind people what's missing in this case. What are the holes? What are we looking for from the public when they call the tip line?
Obviously, the biggest missing element here is Brian and Joni. I think that's the biggest thing. And then the vehicle, obviously. The physical evidence of this case is nil. There's absolutely nothing to go on. One thing I do want to bring up again, and this is going back to Brian's brother Colin and his girlfriend Karen. After we had talked with Joni's family, there were a lot of fingers being pointed in their direction. There was a lot of information that came from them that would lead that to be a plausible scenario, that they were somehow involved. However, we had a lot of discussions about this afterwards. I would find it very hard to believe that Brian and Joni went missing say it's at this residence, at Karen's residence, say it's there, that they would go missing there, police would search that area
multiple
and
times.
Not a shred of evidence
right.
ever turned up. We're not dealing with the mob. We're not dealing with criminal masterminds here. We're not dealing with organized crime. We're dealing with possibly two people in this case, if we're going to consider them suspects or persons of interest. It would be extremely difficult for them to clean up a crime scene like that as well as they apparently would have. Does that make sense?
It does.
I feel like if police and law enforcement and the FBI have searched these properties in the Rush Run Road area as well as they have and turned up absolutely nothing,
Then we shouldn't be pointing fingers.
I really don't think that
I
there
agree.
should be no, I'm not saying they shouldn't be considered and shouldn't be questioned in the future, but I think if there was a crime committed on that location, they would have found something.
Another thing that we haven't been able to really include in the episodes is our off-camera discussions with police. And you and I figured out very quickly it's not like it is on TV. Like, they don't zoom in on the main suspect, right? We've talked to police departments from 2 different counties, 2 different cities now, and they do so much work. Like, you know, we're sitting here saying, oh, they questioned these people. They also questioned 20 other people. They have done absolutely everything they can, but we're still at the point where the night Brian and Joni go missing, we know they leave Pizza Hut in St. Clairsville, and we know the cell phone pings on Rush Run Road, and we need someone to call in and put some pieces together of what happened in the interim.
Right. I feel like this case especially, the folks at Belmont County Sheriff's Office and the FBI have done a ton of research and investigation into this. They have files and files and hours of interviews that they have been through to try to find what's happening here. And obviously, again, we can't cover every bit of that on the show. Unfortunately, I wish we could, but there's a lot involved here and there are a lot of different angles, and you know, some of that information is just not available to us as well.
And so while police have done their due diligence, both of these cases are lacking evidence. It's 2 different scenarios,
Very different
but
scenarios.
both of these have these hole where there's lacking evidence. Police have done almost everything that, you know, they're still working. So that's why I say almost everything they can. They're still working. And we are here to try to help, but we need the public to do that. We need you to call the tip line, talk to people, just whatever. And you will talk to police. You're not calling us, you know, and they have told us multiple times on camera, off camera, anything is helpful.
Absolutely, anything at all. And even, again, I keep bringing this up, even if it's something that you heard, if you ever heard somebody talking about it and they say, well, I knew my brother or my cousin, you know, whatever, somebody was involved, throw that tip out there and it'll be followed up on. And again, the tip line is 877-TIPS for us. It's 877-TIPS, the number 4 US, and that is the Crime Stoppers Upper Ohio Valley tip line. There's more information at the Crime Stoppers website too. If you Google Crime Stoppers Upper Ohio Valley, all of the information is there, as well as clips from our show. And the core idea that we're trying to get across with Crime Stoppers is that if you know anything, if you've heard anything at all, use the tip line. Absolutely use the tip line.
So we just want to thank everyone for watching and commenting and interacting. It's supposed to be like that. We want you to call the tip line, but also we put this on Facebook for a reason. We chose our medium on purpose. So we thank you for watching, and we're going to keep going too.
Absolutely. We have some new things in the works now. We're working with a couple of different law enforcement agencies on unsolved cases that they have. Some of them are recent. I do have one that we're looking into from 1978.
Okay.
So we might be hopping in the Wayback Machine there here soon as well. But again, any information that you have specifically about a case, call the tip line. If you have any questions about cases that we're covering, always feel free to reach out to us on Facebook. And get us on the Love OV page and mention that, you know, you have questions. What about this angle? Because we don't always catch everything either.
Absolutely.
So, all right, well, thank you for watching. This has been Crime Stoppers, presented by Main Street Bank. It's a production of WTRF7, Love OV, and Crime Stoppers Upper Ohio Valley.